The envelope was already open when Valentina Cruz walked into Dante Moretti's office that Tuesday morning. She noticed that immediately. The crisp white rectangle sitting on the corner of his desk, its flap peeled back, as though whatever lived inside had already been decided, digested, and set aside like a bill paid in full. She noticed it, the way she had trained herself to notice everything in 6 years of working for the most dangerous man in the city quietly. Without moving her eyes, without breaking her stride, without letting her heartbeat stutter in a way that might be read. What she could not control was the way her hand pressed, involuntarily, against the front of her blazer. A reflex, a habit she hadn't yet learned to break. She was 9 weeks along. She didn't know that Dante already knew. "Sit down, Valentina." He didn't look up from the document he was reading. His voice had that particular quality it carried in the moments before something irreversible. Level, dry, almost gentle. The way the air goes still before a storm decides what direction it wants to move. She sat. The leather chair was cold, even through the fabric of her slacks. The office smelled like his preferred coffee, like the leather, bound ledgers stacked on the shelf behind him, like the faint trace of gunpowder that clung to the room no matter how many times the cleaning crew came through. "I've heard things," he said. He set the document down with a precision that she recognized as theatrical. Dante Moretti was never careless with his gestures. He curated them. "Things I prefer to verify myself before I act." She said nothing. The first rule she had learned, ouch, not written anywhere, not spoken aloud, only absorbed through proximity, was that in this room. Silence was often the safest answer. He finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of smoke, stained glass, gray-green. Not beautiful exactly, but impossible to look away from. The kind of eyes that made you feel as though every thought you'd ever had was being read and catalogued. He was 34. He had run the Moretti syndicate since he was 26, when his father had his first stroke and the organization had quietly, violently restructured itself around the son who had always been the more capable one anyway. He wore a charcoal suit. He had not yet poured his morning coffee. "You're pregnant," he said. Not a question. The room contracted. Valentina felt the sensation she always felt in moments of acute danger. Not panic, not exactly, but a kind of hyper-clarity. Every detail of the environment sharpening at once, the grain of the wood on his desk, the faint sound of traffic 14 floors below, the weight of the air between them. "Yes," she said. Something crossed his face. She would spend 6 years trying to name it. Whatever it was lasted only a fraction of a second before his expression settled back into the controlled neutrality he wore like armor. "You understand," he said, "that this position requires absolute discretion, absolute availability. There are operations in progress that depend on your access, your clearance, your ability to be present without complication." She understood what he was saying. She understood it with a precision that made her stomach clench in a way that had nothing to do with the nausea she'd been managing for 3 weeks. "I can still perform my duties," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steadiness for so long it had become structural. "And after?" he said. She didn't answer that. She couldn't, because the honest answer was, "I don't know. I am terrified. I am also not going to pretend this child doesn't exist to make your operations more convenient." He picked up the open envelope, removed the single sheet inside, slid it across the desk toward her. It was a termination letter, effective immediately. "Generous severance." She registered that, the number, which was large enough to tell her that he had prepared this carefully, that it wasn't impulsive, that he had thought about what he owed her and translated it into currency, because that was the only language in which he was fluent when it came to obligation. "You'll have full medical coverage through the end of the year," he said. The apartment is yours now. It's been transferred out of company holdings. I've arranged a reference that will get you positioned anywhere in the private sector you choose. He had thought of everything. He had stripped her out of his world with the same surgical efficiency he applied to every problem. She was, in that moment, a variable he had solved for. She looked at the letter. She looked at him. She thought about saying, "This child is yours." She had practiced those words too, at 3 in the morning, lying in the apartment that was now apparently hers, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the conversation that might never happen. She thought about saying it. She thought about watching his face when she did. She thought about what came after, the complications, the exposure, the danger that would attach to a child who carried Moretti blood in a world where that name was both a shield and a target. She thought about what it meant to be removed from this world. And then she picked up the letter, folded it once, and put it in her bag, she said. She stood, she walked to the door. She did not press her hand to her stomach again. She did not look back. Dante Moretti watched her leave and said nothing. The door closed with the soft, expensive sound of a room that had been designed to contain secrets. He poured his coffee. He drank it. He moved on to the next problem, or so he told himself. She named the boy Nico. She chose it because it was short and strong, and because it did not belong to anyone in either of their families. Oh, it was its own name, a clean slate, a beginning untethered from history. She chose it in the blue, grey hours of a February morning, lying in a hospital bed with this astonishing new person on her chest, this creature who weighed 7 pounds and 14 ounces, and who had, even in his first hour of life, looked up at her with eyes the colour of smoke, stained glass. She recognized those eyes immediately. She had been afraid of that. She had also known, even as she lay there absorbing the reality of him, that she wasn't going to tell Dante. Not then, not yet, maybe not ever. She had run the calculation 100 times in the months leading up to his birth, and each time the answer was the same, telling Dante Moretti that he had a son would not protect Nico. It would endanger him. It would drag him into an inheritance of violence and obligation that Valentina had spent 9 months, growing increasingly determined to deny him. She had lived inside the Moretti world long enough to understand what it meant to belong to it. She had watched men try to leave and fail. She had watched the women in that orbit, the wives, the daughters, the trusted employees like herself, navigating the constant low-level tension of proximity to power that did not distinguish between protection and control. She had been good at that world. She had been, in truth, more than goodage. She had been exceptional at it, which was why it had taken her 6 years to recognize how deeply she had been absorbed into something that was not hers and never would be. Nico would not grow up in it, so she left, really left Hood. Not the city immediately, but the life. She took the severance. She kept the apartment for 8 months, until she had saved enough to move somewhere smaller and entirely her own. And then she found a job with a legitimate security consulting firm whose founder had no idea who she'd previously worked for and didn't ask. She was good at what she did. Within 2 years, she was a senior analyst. Within 4, she was running her own division, a small team specializing in corporate threat assessment, the kind of work that used the same skills she developed inside the Moretti organization, but applied them to a world where the stakes were balance sheets and boardrooms, rather than territories and bodies. She built something. She built it carefully, the way she did everything, with attention to every detail, and a particular vigilance about what she allowed into her life and what she kept out. What she did not do, what she had promised herself in those blue, grey February hours she would never do, was let Nico grow up without knowing who he was. She was careful about it. She told him gradually, in age-appropriate increments, the way you introduce a child to difficult truths, not all at once, not with drama, but as facts of the landscape, as steady ground under his feet. Your father is a powerful man. I loved him, in my way. He doesn't know you exist. One day when you're older, we'll decide together what to do about that. Nico was 5 when he asked if his father was a bad man. She had sat with that question for a long time before answering. He's a complicated man, she said. He does things that I don't agree with, but he's not cruel for cruelty's sake. He has his own arse code. Like a superhero. She had almost laughed. Not exactly. More like he has rules that he follows. But the rules aren't always the same as everyone else's. Nico had considered this with the particular seriousness he brought to all large subjects. He was 5 and already observant in a way that unnerved her sometimes, that reminded her too sharply of his father. The quality of his attention, the way he watched things before he engaged with them, careful processing before he spoke. "Okay," he said. "Can I have a snack?" She had adored him so completely in that moment that it felt like a physical sensation. The night everything changed began, as so many significant nights do, without any indication of what it was. Valentina was working late at the office. Not unusual, she often stayed after her team had gone, using the quiet hours to think through the more complex threat assessments without the productive noise of the working day. Nico was with her mother, who had come to visit for 2 weeks and who had, since arriving, conducted a sustained and loving campaign to overfeed everyone in the apartment. She was reviewing a file on a mid-sized pharmaceutical company that had hired her firm to assess unusual activity around their executive team. The kind of vague, uncomfortable request that usually, in her experience, meant someone was being followed and didn't want to say so directly. She had been working through the pattern for an hour when her assistant knocked. "You have a visitor?" Elena said, with a particular note in her voice that Valentina had learned to pay attention to. Elena was unflappable in the way that only former military personnel tended to be, and the note in her voice now was not alarm exactly, but adjacent to it. The register of someone who had encountered something unexpected and was carefully managing her reaction. "Oh, he says his name is Marco Reyes. He says you'll know who he is." Valentina did know. Marco Reyes was Dante Moretti's second, his right hand, his fixer, the man who moved between the organization's visible and invisible layers with the ease of someone who had long since stopped distinguishing between them. She had worked alongside him for 6 years. She had trusted him within the particular limits of trust that applied inside the Moretti world, which meant she had trusted him to be exactly as loyal to Dante as he had always been, and not 1 degree more or less. Straightened the file on her desk. She straightened her spine. Send him in. Marco Reyes was 50. Lean in the way of men who have been lean their whole lives, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something better, arresting, asymmetric, carrying the history of the years in it. He wore a grey coat. He held his hat in both hands in a gesture that was either deference or performance, and with Marco it was impossible to be sure which. "Valentina?" he said. His voice was warm. It had always been warm. That was one of the things that made him effective. The warmth was real, as far as she had ever been able to tell, even when he was delivering terrible news. "Marco?" She did not stand. "Sit down." He sat. He looked around the office with genuine curiosity, taking in what she had built, and she could see the assessment happening. The quality of the furniture, the view, the stack of files, the framed photo on the corner of her desk, which was angled away from him, but which he would have clocked. "You've done well," he said. "Why are you here?" He folded his hands. This was a gesture she remembered. Oh, the particular configuration of his fingers when he was about to say something that required careful packaging. "There's been a development," he said. "A situation involving the Ferrante family. I don't need to tell you the history. The Ferrante family has been moving against the Moretti organization for 2 years," she said. "I've been watching it. It's not my business anymore, but old habits." She paused. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that has Dante considering options he wouldn't normally consider." Marco met her eyes. "He needs a threat assessment. Not from inside up. The inside is compromised. He needs someone clean. Someone who understands the structure. Someone the Ferrantes don't know about. He has people. He needs you." The words fell into the room with a weight she had not been prepared for, and she was almost always prepared. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its night business indifferent. "He knows where I am," she said. "He's always known where you are." That landed differently than she expected. Not as threat exactly, but as something she needed to file away and examine later. The fact that in 6 years of building a life, at what she had believed was a safe distance, she had been visible to him the entire time. She wasn't sure what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Tell him no," she said. Marco nodded slowly. He had expected this. "He thought you might say that. He asked me to tell you." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He set it on the desk between them. She didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Intelligence. About a specific threat. One that is relevant to your current circumstances." The way he said, "current circumstances," told her everything. She looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. She recognized the street. It was 2 blocks from her apartment. She recognized the man in the photograph. She had been, until this moment, unaware that he knew where she lived. The man in the photograph was Cesare Ferrante, the second son. The one with the reputation for solving problems through the kind of solution that didn't leave loose ends. And in the background of the photograph, slightly blurred but unmistakable, was a small boy walking next to an older woman, her mother. And Nico, Valentina kept her face very still. This was the hardest thing she had ever had to do with her face. "How long?" she said. "The surveillance on you has been active for 6 weeks." Marco said. "We found it 4 days ago." She put the photograph back in the envelope. "She put the envelope on the desk," she breathed. "Why would the Ferrantes be interested in me?" she asked, though she thought she knew. "Because someone talked," Marco said. "6 years ago, someone in the organization saw something they shouldn't have seen." "Valentina?" He paused, and the warmth in his voice shifted to something more careful. "They know about the boy." The room was very quiet. "They know," Marco continued, "that Nico is Dante's son." She had spent 6 years building walls. In the space of a single breath, she felt them become inadequate. Titu, she called her mother first. She kept her voice even, warm, ordinary. She told her mother to take Nico to his aunt's house in the suburbs, to pack for a few days, to tell him it was an adventure. Her mother, who had grown up in circumstances that had given her a particular sensitivity to the difference between reassurance and alarm, asked no questions. Within 20 minutes, she had sent a location confirmation from the aunt's address. Only after that did Valentina sit back in her chair and let herself feel, briefly, the full weight of what was happening. Then she stood up and began to plan. She called Marco from the car. "I'll come in," she said, "tomorrow morning. But I need certain conditions. He'll agree to whatever you need." "You don't know what I need yet, Valentina." A pause. "He'll agree." She spent the night at her office, partly because it was more secure than the apartment and partly because she needed the hours. She pulled every piece of intelligence she had compiled over the past 18 months on the Ferrante family. She had been watching them. She hadn't been lying about that old habit and she began to build a picture. What she saw was not good. The Ferrante organization had been restructuring under Cesar's influence since their father's health had declined. It was leaner, more aggressive, more willing to use exposure as a weapon. The traditional rules of engagement that had maintained a fragile peace between the city's major families for a decade had been eroding. Cesar Ferrante was, by her assessment, the kind of man who didn't want territory so much as he wanted to be the last one standing. The move against Nico was not a move against her. It was a move against Dante. The most efficient way to destroy a man like Dante Moretti was not to kill him. Men like Dante had made arrangements for their own death, structured the organization to survive it, turned their own mortality into a strategic document. The most efficient way was to reveal a weakness he hadn't known he had, a vulnerability so acute and so personal that it would compromise his judgment, force him into reactive decisions, pull him out of the cold control that was the actual source of his power. A son he didn't know existed would do that. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about Nico, who was currently eating her aunt's cooking and probably charming everyone in the room without trying to. She thought about what it meant to walk back into Dante Moretti's world. She thought about what it meant to walk in with his son's existence in her hands as both the thing she was protecting and the thing she was delivering. She made a decision. It was the hardest decision she had made since she picked up that termination letter and walked out of his office, and it was the only one available to her. She was going to tell him. The Moretti building looked the same. That was the first thing she noticed. 14 floors of glass and deliberate anonymity, the kind of architecture that announces power by refusing to announce it. The lobby had the same marble, the same quiet, the same quality of alert stillness, as though the building itself was paying attention. Marco met her at the elevator. He looked at her the way he always had, with something between professional appreciation and genuine affection, the particular regard of a man who has watched someone perform under pressure and been impressed. "You look good," he said. "I've had 6 years of sleep," she said. "Take me up." The elevator rose. She regulated her breathing. She thought about the first thing she had felt when she saw that photograph. Not fear, not anger, but something more fundamental. The kind of clarity that comes when you have no more room for anything except the essential. She had felt it before, in situations of acute danger. She knew what to do with it. The door to his office was the same door. She knocked. "Come in." His voice was the same. That was absurder. She had known it would be the same. Voices didn't change in 6 years. Not fundamentally, but something in her had apparently prepared for difference, and the sameness of it landed like a small collision. She opened the door and walked in. He was standing at the window. He turned when she entered, and she had, in the fraction of a second before he arranged his expression, a glimpse of something unguarded, something she couldn't quite name, before the familiar neutrality settled back into place. He looked older. Not worser, sharper, perhaps more precisely himself. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open in a way that she had always found. She filed the thought away. "Valentina," he said. "Dante," she said. They looked at each other across the width of his office, which she remembered as feeling enormous, and which now felt considerably smaller, as though the 6 years had rearranged something about its geometry. "Sit down," he said. "In a moment," she said. "There's something I need to tell you before we discuss anything else." He waited. He was very good at waiting. It had always been one of the things about him. Up, the way he could be entirely still, entirely present, without impatience, which should have been a quality she admired, and was instead, in this moment, deeply inconvenient because she had been hoping his impatience might give her an opening. She had rehearsed this. She had rehearsed it on the drive over, choosing words with the same precision she brought to a threat assessment. She had rehearsed it in the elevator. And now that she was here, in this specific room, with this specific man, with the window light falling on his face in the same direction it always had, all of her prepared sentences dissolved. "I have a son," she said. "His name is Nico. He's 5 years old."
"He has your eyes."
The silence that followed was the longest she had ever experienced in this room, and she had sat through some extraordinary silences. Something happened to Dante Moretti's face. She watched it happen. She watched the neutrality cracker, not in a dramatic way, not with visible emotion, but in the way that very precisely maintained things crack a single, clean fracture line, the structure on either side of it suddenly visible as having been held in place by effort rather than nature. He sat down. She had never, in 6 years, seen him need to sit down when he had not already been planning to. "Say that again," he said. "The last part." "He has your eyes." She met his. "He is your son, Dante. I have known since the night he was born. When I looked at him and saw..." She stopped. "He's yours." The silence continued. The city continued beyond the window, indifferent as always. "You didn't tell me," he said. His voice had a quality she had never heard in it before. Controlled still, but under enormous pressure, the way a surface holds its shape while the structure beneath it reorganizes. "No," she said.
"I didn't. Why?"
Why, she had rehearsed this too. "Because you fired me for being pregnant," she said. "Because the world you run is not a world I was going to raise him in. Because I had calculated, and I believe correctly, that telling you would have meant losing him to something I couldn't protect him from." She paused. "I was protecting him. From me. From the life." He looked at her for a long time. She let him. She did not look away. "He's in danger now," he said. Not a question Marco would have briefed him. "Yes, which is why I'm here." She sat down finally, in the leather chair. It was still cold. "And why I'm telling you. Not because I've changed my assessment of the risk, but because you have a right to know about a threat to your son, and because..." She paused, choosing this carefully. "Because I need your resources to keep him safe, and I am not willing to use them without giving you the truth." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, "I want to see him." The words hit her somewhere she hadn't armored. "I know," she said. "We'll get to that. First we need to deal with Cesare Ferranti." She spent the next 3 hours in a conference room with Dante, Marco, and 2 of Dante's most trusted lieutenants. She presented her threat assessment with the precision she had spent 6 years refining, laying out the Ferranti operation's vulnerabilities, its pressure points, the specific intelligence gap that had allowed the surveillance on her to operate for 6 weeks before detection. She knew, better at this than anyone else in the room. Not because she was smarter than Dante, who was very smart, but because she had the dual perspective of having been inside his organization and outside it, which gave her a particular clarity about where the blind spots were. She watched him watch her work. She didn't let herself think about what was on his face when he thought she wasn't looking. By the end of the 3 hours, they had a plan. It was good not reckless, not reactive, but strategic in a way that would resolve the threat without escalation, without the kind of open conflict that would destabilize the fragile equilibrium that was the only thing standing between the city's various competing interests and something much worse. "The key," she said, "is to make Cesare believe he still has leverage he doesn't actually have." The information about Nico is his advantage, but only if Dante's reaction to is what he expects. Explosive, compromised, reactive. If we're calm, if we move before he expects it, if we make him understand that the information is now worthless because we've already changed the board, he'll have to find another angle, Dante said. And we'll be waiting for it. She nodded. He looked at her with that expression she couldn't quite name. You've been watching this for 18 months, he said. Not because it was your job. Old habits, she said again. Or old loyalties? No, she didn't answer that. After Marco and the lieutenants had left, Dante and Valentina sat alone in the conference room for the first time. The map was still on the table between them. The coffee was cold. The afternoon light had shifted. Tell me about him, Dante said. She looked at the map. Then at him.
He's 5,
she said. He started school in September. He's deliberate. He watches things before he joins them. He's good at reading people orc. He picks up on emotional undercurrents in a way that's sometimes startling in a child his age. She paused. He's kind. He goes out of his way to be kind. I think that's the best thing about him. And I think, I hope, it's partly because he's never had to be anything else. Dante was very still. The quality of his stillness had changed from the controlled neutral she was familiar with to something more raw, more effortful. Does he know about me? He asked. I told him he has a father who doesn't know he exists, that he's a complicated man, that one day we would decide together what to do about it. Something moved through his face. A complicated man, he said.
I was trying to be honest without no, he said. It's accurate.
A pause. What does he like? She found, to her own surprise, that this question made her throat tight. The specificity of it, not what is he like, but what does he like, the care of it, the implied desire to know the actual texture of the child's days. Books about animals. Complicated mechanical things. He takes toys apart to see how they work and then puts them back together. Football, his grandmother's cooking, drawing maps of places he imagines. She paused. He hates loud noises. He's working on that too. He doesn't want to be afraid of things and he's very determined about it. She paused again. He reminds me of you. I've been trying to decide for 5 years whether that's reassuring or terrifying. Dante looked at her for a long moment. I want to meet him, he said. When this is done, when he's safe, I want to. He stopped. He ran a hand over his jaw in a gesture she recognized. The gesture he made when he was feeling something he hadn't yet found language for. I understand why you didn't tell me. I don't. He stopped again. I need you to understand that I don't forgive myself for putting you in a position where you thought you couldn't. This was not something she had prepared for. She had prepared for anger, for cold calculation, for the kind of controlled recrimination that Dante used when he felt he had been maneuvered. She had not prepared for this. You fired me for being pregnant, she said, keeping her voice even. Yes, that's not something I'm going to reframe into. I'm not asking you to. He met her eyes. I'm telling you that I know what I did, and I know what it cost, and I have had 6 years to sit with that, and... He stopped. I thought I was making a choice that was practical. That was the word I used to myself. Practical. The pause stretched. I was wrong. About what was practical and about... He stopped again. About what? She said. He looked at her in a way that she had not seen before, or perhaps had seen and not allowed herself to name. About what mattered, he said. She didn't respond to that. She couldn't. Not yet. There was too much ground between them, too many years. Too much that needed to be worked through before they arrived anywhere close to a place where that conversation could happen. But she noted it. She filed it in the place where she kept things that required careful examination later. One thing at a time, she said. First we keep Nico safe. Yes, he said. First that. The next 4 days were the most concentrated work she had done in years, and she had not been lazy in the intervening years. She moved her base of operations to the Moretti building, not because it was safer than her own office, but because the intelligence resources available there were significantly beyond what she had access to independently, and she needed every advantage. She did not bring Nico there. Nico stayed at her aunt's house with her mother and 2 of Marco's people whom Valentina had personally vetted. She called him every evening at 6. The calls usually running to 20 minutes, during which he told her about the animals he'd seen, the things he'd built, the book he was reading, and asked repeatedly when she was coming back. She told him soon. She kept her voice easy and warm and ordinary, in the way that loving parents who are managing crises have always done, performing normalcy for the children they are trying to protect. Dante, she noticed, sometimes stood near the door when she made these calls. Not obviously, not intrusively, but near enough that she was aware of him, and she thought that he was listening, and she thought that she didn't mind. On the second day he stopped her after one of the calls and said, quietly, "Would it be all right if I said hello to him?" She looked at him for a long time. His face was unusually, entirely unguarded. She said, "Not over the phone. He deserves that to be real in person." "When he can see your face," he nodded. "You're right. I usually am," she said. "You never liked that about me." "I always liked that about you," he said. It was inconvenient, but I liked it. She walked away before she could have a reaction to that. On the third night, at 2 in the morning, she was still in the conference room running numbers when he came in with 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without a word. He sat down on the other side of the map. She kept working. He watched her for a while, and then he began reviewing a separate document, and they worked in silence for an hour that was, she found, not uncomfortable. At some point she looked up and found him watching her with that expression she had been trying to name for 3 days. It was, she realized now, recognition. As though he was seeing something he had misplaced and had spent a long time being unable to locate. "Nothing," he said. "Go back to work." She did. But something had shifted. In the particular way that things shift in the small hours of the morning, when the ordinary protections of daylight and business and structured purpose have temporarily lowered their guard. The operation ran on the 4th night. Valentina was not in the field she had been clear about that, and Dante had not pushed, which was itself a change she noticed. The Dante she remembered would have used her asset value to argue for her field presence regardless of her preferences. This Dante accepted her boundary without negotiation and arranged the operation around it. She managed it from the building, coordinating the 3 separate elements of the plan with the precision she had always been good at. The intelligence she had prepared was accurate. She had triple-checked every component, because accuracy in this context was the difference between resolution and catastrophe, and she was not operating with acceptable margins for error. The plan worked because Cesare Ferrante, for all his tactical aggression, had not anticipated being outmaneuvered informationally. He had expected reactive anger from Dante. He had expected the vulnerability of a newly revealed illegitimate child to produce exactly the kind of emotional disruption that would create openings. He had not expected calm, coordinated, pre-emptive action. By 11 that night, Cesare's surveillance network had been dismantled. By midnight, the specific threat to Nico had been neutralized through a combination of intelligence exposure. Making Cesare organization now possessed information that would be far more destabilizing to the Ferrante family than any leveraged Cesare thought he held. Had a private conversation that Marco had tempted with the family's older, cooler, headed patriarch who had not yet fully relinquished control. It was not a permanent solution. Valentina had been clear about that in the briefing. This was a strategic pause, not a resolution. The underlying tension between the families would need a longer-term diplomatic architecture that she had outlined in a separate document. But the immediate threat was gone. Nico was safe, she told her mother. She told Elena to begin winding down the security protocols. She sat in the conference room at 12:30 in the morning with the empty coffee cups and the annotated maps and let herself feel, briefly, the enormous relief of it. Dante came in 20 minutes later. He set his phone on the table. He sat down. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "Your assessment saved his life." "Our assessment," she said. "No. I've worked with the best analysts in the city for 15 years. What you put together in 4 days alone? Before you even walked in here." He stopped. "Don't deflect." "I'm not deflecting. I'm being accurate." He almost smiled. She saw it, the very edge of it, before it retreated. "You can bring him to the city," he said. "It's safe." "I know. I'll get them tomorrow." A pause. "I'd like to be there," he said. "When you pick them up?" "I'd like to." He stopped. "I don't want to wait any more." She looked at him. He looked back. There was no armor in his face in that moment. Nothing performed. Nothing curated. Just a man sitting with the fact that he had a son he had never met and was trying to find the words for what that felt like. "Okay," she said softly. "Tomorrow." She had thought about this moment for 5 years, in the abstract, running the various scenarios such, the hostile version, the cold version, the too eager version, the version where Nico reacted badly or was frightened or simply refused to engage. She had a child with a cautious and watchful temperament. She had always known that introducing his father would require patience and care, and that there was no way to predict how it would go. What she had not prepared for was the actual morning. The drive to her aunt's house with Dante in the passenger seat, a man who had never seemed uncertain in her presence and who was, she could see, uncertain now, not paralyzed, not reactive, but simply and genuinely unsure, which was its own kind of nakedness. She had not prepared for the sound of Nico's voice when she opened the front door, the quick thump of his feet on the hallway floor, the way he came around the corner and stopped when he saw her and said, "Mama," with the particular weight children give to words when what they mean is, "See, I was trying not to be scared, and now you're here." She crouched and held him for a moment. His arms went around her neck, and he pressed his face against her jaw, and she breathed him in. Her aunt's house, warm food, the specific smell of his hair, which had always smelled faintly of outdoors regardless of when he had last been outside. She held him for a moment. Then she stood up and turned toward Dante, who was standing in the doorway, and she watched his face when he saw Nico properly for the first time. She had been right about the eyes. She had known she was right. She had lived with it for 5 years. But the moment when Dante saw it too, the moment when recognition moved through his face like weather, was something she had not quite anticipated in its actual texture. Nico looked at Dante. He did not hide behind her. He was not, whatever else he was, a child who hid her. He processed and then he engaged, on his own terms, in his own time. "Hello," Nico said, with the kind of measured courtesy that 5-year-olds produce when they have picked up osmosis, the adult habit of politeness as a first strategy. "Hello," Dante said. His voice was low, careful, the most careful she had ever heard it. Nico looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, in the tone of someone conducting a straightforward inquiry, "Are you my father?" The silence that followed was enormous. Valentina did not move. She watched Dante absorb the question arch, watched him go very still, watched something in his face move through grief and wonder and something that might have been shame and came out the other side as, She could only call it resolve. I am. And Nico considered this. He looked at Dante the way he looked at mechanical things he was deciding whether to take apart. Okay, he said. Are you staying for breakfast? Grandma made eggs. Valentina's mother, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway during this exchange with a particular expression on her face, one that combined deep maternal protectiveness with the forced neutrality of someone determined not to interfere, made a small sound that she quickly covered. Dante looked at Valentina. There was something in his eyes that she had no armor against. May I? He said. Yes, she said. Come in. You two, breakfast was not simple. Breakfast was, in fact, one of the most complicated meals she had ever sat through, in a life that had contained some genuinely complicated meals. Her mother was warm and watchful and deeply suspicious in equal measure, the way mothers are when a man they have heard about primarily through the filter of pain is sitting at their kitchen table. Nico ate eggs and asked Dante 17 questions in rapid succession about topics that included, but were not limited to, whether he had ever seen a cheetah in real life, what the largest number he could count to was, whether he thought robots would have feelings one day, and what his favorite color was. Dante answered every question with seriousness and attention, and the particular quality of presence that Valentina had always noticed offing. When Dante was interested in something, he was fully interested, with none of the half-distracted quality of a person performing engagement while thinking about something else. His favorite color was gray. Nico had looked at this answer for a moment and then said solemnly, "Mine is green. But grey is good too," as though he was granting a concession. "I appreciate that," Dante said. After breakfast, Nico asked if Dante wanted to see his maps. This was significant. Valentina knew it was significant, because Nico's maps were private. He kept them in a journal with a clasp lock that had been known to reduce younger visitors to tears. And she watched Dante understand, without being told that he was being offered something valuable. "I would like that very much," Dante said. They went into the small room her aunt had given Nico, with its single bed covered in stuffed animals of various taxonomic categories, and Nico produced the journal from under the bed and opened it to a specific page and began to explain, in great detail, the geography of an imaginary continent he had named Verdono. Valentina stood in the doorway and watched her son introduce his father to the places he had built in his imagination, and she thought, "This is the thing I was most afraid of, and it is also the best thing I have ever seen." They drove back to the city that afternoon, the four of them, her mother in the back with Nico, Valentina driving, Dante in the passenger's seat. Nico fell asleep somewhere outside the suburbs, with the particular abruptness of young children, one moment asking questions and the next gone, tilted against his grandmother's arm with his mouth slightly open. The car was quiet. Her mother was looking out the window. Dante was looking at Nico in the rearview mirror with an expression she could see reflected there, and she did not look away from the road. "I owe you an apology," he said, quietly enough that it would not travel to the back seat. "You already gave me one," she said. "Not properly." He turned to look at her. "What I did was wrong. Not strategically wrong, morally wrong. You were pregnant. You were in a vulnerable position, and I used my power to remove the inconvenience of you from my life. I called it practical. It wasn't. It was cowardice in a suit." She kept her eyes on the road. "Dante!" "I want to say it correctly," he said. "I want to say it in a way that doesn't leave room for reinterpretation. I was wrong. What I lost because of it." He stopped. I can't get those years back. I know that. But I want you to know that I know what they cost. Both of you." She was quiet for a long time, watching the city approach on the horizon, its skyline familiar and complicated. "I'm not going to absolve you in a car," she said finally. "I know. I'm not going to absolve you at all, in the sense that, I can forgive you, with time, and I think I'm in the process of it. But I don't want to perform closure for your comfort." "No," he said. "I don't want that either." She glanced at him briefly. His face was open in a way she had rarely seen. "What do you want?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "To know him," he said. "To deserve the chance to know him." A pause. "To not make the same mistake again." His voice was lower now, careful with the weight of what he was putting in the air between them. To not let another 6 years go by because I was afraid of what I wanted." She said nothing. The city was closer now. The skyline was reaching up into the late afternoon light, familiar and impossible. The same city she had driven away from 6 years ago, with everything she owned in 2 bags, and a secret she was still learning the shape of. She thought about the night she had left. She thought about the termination letter, folded once, in her bag. Thought about the decision she had made in those blue, grey February hours. This child will not grow up in that world. This child will know who he is. This child will be protected from the weight of this inheritance. And she thought about whether she had been right. She thought she had been right. She also thought that she had made the decision she was capable of making at the time, with the information and the emotional resources she had, and that it had been the best available choice in a set of choices that were never going to be clean. She thought about the man sitting beside her, who was looking at his sleeping son in the rearview mirror with an expression she had no more resistance to than she had resistance to the love that had gotten her into this situation in the first place. "Oh no," she thought. "Oh no, I have not resolved this." The weeks that followed were complicated. She was not going to use a softer word than that, because she was a person who insisted on accurate language, even when inaccuracy might be more comfortable. She returned to her apartment, which Dante had arranged additional security for without being asked. She returned to her work. She returned to her life, which was what she had, which was good, her team, her cases, her routine, the particular satisfaction of applying what she knew to problems that mattered. Dante came for dinner on Wednesday. This was Nico's idea. He had asked, in the way children ask things that have enormous consequence, whether his father could come for dinner, because he had more questions about robots, and also he wanted to show him the new section of the Verdano maps. Valentina had said yes before she'd had a chance to process the implications. He brought food from a restaurant that she happened to love, which was either research or a very good guess, and she didn't ask which. He sat at her kitchen table and ate, and talked to Nico about robots and the nature of imaginary geography, and her mother, who had stayed an extra week due to a combination of genuine concern and, Valentina suspected, profound unwillingness to miss what was happening. Watched everything with the expression of a woman who has a great deal to say and is temporarily restraining herself. After Nico was in bed, they sat on the small balcony. It was getting cold, the city moving into autumn, and she had brought a blanket that she arranged around her shoulders without offering to share. "You could have come sooner," he said, looked at him. "What?" "To tell me. You could have come sooner than when there was a threat. You could have come when he was born, when he was 1, when he was 3. He held up a hand before she could speak. "I'm not accusing you. I understood why you made the choice you made. I'm asking, if the threat had never materialized, would you have told me? Ever?" She sat with this question honestly. "I don't know," she said. I had decided that when he was old enough to participate in the decision, we would make it together. But I don't know if I would have been brave enough to do it before that. Why not? Because walking back into your world is terrifying, she said. Not because of the danger. Because she stopped, he waited. Because I never entirely left, she said quietly. In the ways that mattered. And I had spent 6 years building something that was mine, that wasn't tangled up in you. And I was afraid that if I came back even slightly, I would lose that. Or lose the thread of it. She looked at the city. I was afraid of how much I still. She stopped again. How much you still what? He said. She looked at him. He looked back. The city spread behind him, all its lights and distances. We were never. It was not a relationship, she said. It was a night. One night, at the end of something very difficult. And it was not planned and it was not. I know what it was, he said. Do you? It was the only time, he said, in 10 years of running this organization, that I did something that was entirely my own. Nothing strategic in it. Nothing calculated. He paused. And then I spent the next morning calculating it away. He looked at her. That is one of the things I am most ashamed of. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that holds something rather than evacuating it.
Dante, she said. Yes.
I need time, she said. More than this. I need us to do this carefully for Nico's sake in a way that is. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I know. She stopped. That's new, she said. I need to adjust to that. He almost smiled again. This time it didn't retreat. Adjust at whatever pace you need, he said. I'll be here. She looked at him for a moment, and then she looked away, because looking at him for too long at this particular moment was more than she was ready for. Wednesday next week, she said. Bring dinner, he said. I'll cook, she said. It's my kitchen. 2-3 months passed. They were not easy months, Nothing about this was easy, But they were, she found, good ones. The architecture of what they were building was slow and deliberate and punctuated by difficulty, by the moments when old wounds surfaced, by the times when she would catch herself feeling something she wasn't ready to feel and have to pull back, and by the times when he would say something or do something that revealed the man he had been working to become, and she would have to recalibrate everything. He was present. That was the thing she had not fully anticipated. How consistently, how quietly, how non-dramatically present he was. He came on Wednesdays. He called on Sundays, briefly, ostensibly to check in with Nico, which Nico loved with a totality that should perhaps have been alarming and was instead purely sweet to witness. He respected her space without being asked. He did not push. He did not perform. He arrived for dinner with his sleeves rolled up and sat on the kitchen floor to explain the mechanics of a watch that Nico had disassembled, and he attended Nico's school play in a suit that cost more than most of the other parents made in a month, and sat in the 3rd row and clapped louder than anyone. She watched this. She absorbed it with the particular attention she brought to everything. And what she found was that she could not keep herself at the careful distance she had originally intended. She did not name this yet. She let it exist without a name for a while, the way you might observe a new species in its environment, before you classify it. Nico named it first, because of course he did. They were at breakfast on a Saturday, her mother finally having returned home, after a visit that had extended to 6 weeks and produced a series of pointed conversations that Valentina was still processing. Nico was eating cereal. He looked up and said, with the casual directness of a child who has been thinking about something and arrived at a conclusion, I think Papa should live here. Valentina set down her coffee cup We can talk about that, she said carefully. Comes all the time anyway, Nico said. And he always checks if the door is locked before he leaves. Which Grandma says is because he worries about us. And he taught me how to check all the window locks, which is useful. He ate a spoonful of cereal. It would be easier if he just lived here. She looked at her son, who was looking back at her with the watchful, patient expression that had been alarming her for 5 years, and she thought, 5 years old and already working the room. We're working on things, she said. I know, he said, with the serenity of someone who has already decided how things are going to go, and is simply waiting for the adults to catch up, but maybe work faster. She called Dante that evening. He picked up on the second ring. I had an interesting conversation with your son this morning, she said. Oh. She could hear the alertness in his voice, the quick concern. He had developed a parent's responsiveness to that particular opener. He has opinions about the domestic arrangements. A pause then, carefully. Does he? He does. She sat down on the couch. The apartment was quiet, Nico asleep, the city doing its Saturday night things outside the window. He's not wrong, she said, about the direction. The pause this time was different. Charged. Valentina, he said. Don't make it formal, she said. Don't. I'm not ready for formal. But I wanted you to know that I'm that the distance I've been keeping has been about my own fear. Not about. She stopped. Not about what I actually want. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality she had been cataloguing for months. The unguarded version, the one without armor. What do you actually want? He said. I want to not be afraid anymore, she said. I want to try properly, with full information and no illusions and the understanding that it will be. Complicated, he said. A note of warmth, she said. And slow. I need it to be slow. I've been waiting 6 years, he said. Slow is fine. She laughed, a small, prize sound. Real. Technically you didn't know you were waiting. I knew something was missing, he said quietly. I knew that the morning you walked out. I didn't let myself name it, but I knew. A pause. Can I come over? It's 10 o'clock. I know what time it is. She looked at the window, the city lights, the familiar view from an apartment she had built into her life over years of careful construction. Yes, she said. Come over. He was there in 20 minutes. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway in a dark coat, with no particular expression on his face, except the unguarded one she had come to recognize as the version of him that was actually true. He said. She stepped back to let him in. He came in. The door closed. The apartment held the specific quiet of a space, with a sleeping child in it, warm and complete. They stood in the hallway for a moment, closer than they had been since the single night 6 years ago that had changed the shape of everything. I owe you more than I can give back, he said.
You're not giving anything back,
she said. We're starting from here. From here, he said. From here. He reached up slowly and touched her face, his thumb against her cheek. The gesture so careful, so entirely unlike the controlled precision he applied to everything else in his life, that she felt it as a kind of revelation that this was the version of him that had existed under all the armor, that had been there the entire time. She put her hand over his. They stood like that for a moment, not kissing yet, not moving, just as present with each other in the particular way that things that have been long postponed feel when they finally arrive. She said softly. Slow, he agreed. 6 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, with autumn finally committing to cold, Nico came into the kitchen at 7:30 and found Dante already there, making coffee, in a way that suggested he had either gotten very good at early mornings or had simply stopped fighting them. Nico climbed onto his usual chair. He looked down. He looked at the coffee. "You're here on a Sunday," Nico said, with the specific note of a person checking that what they expected to happen has in fact happened. "I am," Dante said. Nico nodded, with the satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. "Good," he said. "Can we work on Verdano after breakfast? I've been thinking about the mountain range." "I've also been thinking about the mountain range," Dante said. Which was true. Valentina had found him reading Nico's journal 3 days ago with an expression of genuine engagement. She came in to find them already at the table, Nico's map unfolded between them. Both of them bent over it with the same quality of focused attention. The same slope of the head, the same narrowing of the eyes over some geographical question she would never fully understand. And she stood in the kitchen doorway with her coffee and let herself feel it. The full, uncomplicated weight of what had been built. Not easily, not without cost, not without the losses that could not be recovered. The years, the nights, the mornings that should have been like this one and weren't. Those costs were real. She did not minimize them. But this was also real, this kitchen, this light. These two people bent over an imaginary map with the same exact expression on their faces, the shape of the same jaw, the same green eyes that she had recognized in the first hour of her son's life and had been both afraid of and grateful for ever since. Dante looked up and found her watching. Something moved through his face. The recognition she had been learning to read, the version of him that was true. "The western coast needs rivers," Nico said, not looking up. "Papa says there should be more rivers." "Papa is right," she said. She came to the table and sat down. She set her coffee next to the map. Nico passed her a pencil without being asked. "Here," he said. "You can draw the rivers." She took the pencil. She looked at the map. This imaginary world her son had built, where they were apparently all going to live for a while. Drawing in the geography together, adding the rivers and the mountains and the things that hadn't been named yet. She drew the first river. Nico approved it. Dante suggested a tributary. An argument about tributary placement ensued, conducted with full seriousness by both parties, which she mediated with the particular diplomatic skill she had apparently always had, and had spent too long applying exclusively to the wrong things. Outside, the city moved through its Sunday business, full of its own complications and beauties. The morning light came in at an angle through the window, falling on the map, on her son's hair, on the hands of the man who was finally, slowly, building himself into someone she was willing to trust with what she had most carefully protected. It was not the ending of anything. It was something more difficult and more valuable than an ending. It was a middle, a living and complicated, an ongoing thing, full of the specific, ordinary texture of days that are being chosen rather than endured. She would take it. She had learned, in 6 years of building something entirely her own, that the things worth having were always the ones you had to build, rather than the ones that arrived already complete. She drew the second river. Nico named it immediately. The morning continued. 2-3 weeks after that Sunday, Dante asked Marco to arrange something. He was specific about it. He had spent a month thinking about the specifics, which was more time than he usually spent thinking about anything that didn't directly involve organizational security or strategic positioning. And this was not lost on him, Argur. The fact that he was applying the same quality of attention to this that he applied to the things that mattered most was, he recognized, a kind of answer. He went to her office on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, which was either brave or foolish, and he had made his peace with not knowing which. Alina sent him straight in, with a look that contained an entire editorial. Valentina looked up from her desk. She was wearing her professional face arch. The composed, precise version arch. And he watched it shift when she saw him, the small warm change around the eyes that she didn't always bother to suppress anymore. "You announced," she said. "I didn't want to give you time to prepare defenses," he said. "That's either very honest or very strategic." "Both," he said. "You're going to stand there looking like that until I say yes, so yes." He sat. He looked at her. He had thought about what to say, and had decided to stop thinking about what to say, because he had been thinking too much for too long and it hadn't served either of them. "I want to be with you," he said. "Not," he stopped himself, "not gradually and carefully and at a pace to be determined. I know we've been doing that, and I know why, and I know it's right. But I want you to know, not as a thing we're working toward, but as a thing that is already true, Oj, that you are the person I want." He paused. "You have been, I think, since the first year you worked for me. When you told me that my assessment of the Benedetti situation was wrong and you were correct, and I was furious about it for a week before I admitted it." She was very still. "That was 5 years in," she said. "I know when it was. You were furious for 2 weeks, not 1. "Yes," he said. "That sounds right." She looked at him with the expression he had come to understand as the one she wore when she was deciding how much to allow herself to feel. He waited. He had become very good at waiting. "I'm not going to do this as a subsidiary of your life," she said. "My work, my autonomy." "I know," he said. "I need you to not protect me in ways I haven't asked for," she said. "I need you to know that I am capable." "I know," he said again, and he meant it in a way that was different from how he would have meant it a year ago. Not as concession, but as fact. As something he had watched over months of proximity and had absorbed as the truest thing he knew about her. She looked at him for a long moment. The light in her office was afternoon warm, falling sideways through the windows. "Okay," she said. He said. "Don't make that face." "What face?" "The face you make when you've won something." "I haven't won anything," he said. "Mark. This is the opposite of winning." "This is—" He stopped. He was not, typically, at a loss for language. "This is the thing I don't have a strategy for," he said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. There is no strategy here. There is just—" He gestured, which was not a thing he typically did. "This." She looked at his gesture. She looked at his face. She made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh. "You gestured?" she said. "I'm aware. Dante Moretti," she said. "You gestured at your feelings. Are you going to make this difficult?" he said. "Yes," she said. "For a long time." "Yes," he said. "I don't want anything that isn't difficult." "Easy things aren't." He stopped. "Easy things aren't yours." She stood up from her desk. She walked around it. She stood in front of him and looked up at him with those dark, precise eyes that had been telling him the truth for years before he'd been ready to hear it. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I have not stopped in 6 years. Regardless of what I told myself," she paused, "I need you to know that before we go further. Because I made decisions based on protecting myself and protecting him, and they were the right decisions. But they cost me. Not just what they cost you." She met his eyes. "I want credit for that." "Not absolution, not. You have it," he said. "You have all of it." She put her hand against his chest. He put his hand over hers. They stood like that, in her office with the afternoon light, and the city outside and the 6 years between them, and the very long future ahead. "Come to dinner tonight," she said. "Nico is making something. I say making because he has strong opinions about the process and very limited technique." "I'll come," he said, and then she paused. She tilted her head, the edge of a smile. "Then we'll see," he agreed. She took her hand back. She returned to her desk with a composure she wore like a second skin. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and turned toward the door. He turned back. 6 years, she said. Don't ever do anything like that again? Never, he said. I promise you, never again. She held his gaze for a moment, and in it was everything: the years of absence, the nights alone, the fear, the love that had survived all of them, the child who had his eyes and her stubbornness, and was currently, at this very moment, at home with his grandmother and his maps and his unshakable certainty that things would work out correctly if everyone just paid attention. Goo, she said. I have work. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, he said. He left. She watched the door close. She sat with the silence for a moment. Then she opened the file she had been reviewing and kept working. Because she was a woman who worked, who built things, who applied precision and care to what she did, and this had not changed and would not change, and he knew that, and he was going to have to love that version of her, or he would lose her again. He knew. She believed him, not naively but based on evidence, the way she believed anything, based on accumulation, on pattern, on the quality of what she had observed over months of careful watching. She believed him. That evening, the apartment smelled like burning and ambition, both of which were Nico's contributions to the dinner project. He had decided, with characteristic confidence, to make pasta from scratch, a decision that had resulted in a dusting of flour on every surface within 3 feet of the counter, a pot of water that had boiled dry, and a quantity of pasta that was technically edible, but had the texture of someone's first very earnest attempt, which is exactly what it was. Valentina had salvaged a sauce. Her mother, participating via video call propped against the fruit bowl, offered instructions and emotional support and said, add more garlic at approximately 4-minute intervals. Dante arrived at 2 minutes to 7 in a dark coat, carrying wine and a small package. Nico, who had been watching the door since 6:45, abandoned the sauce immediately. Papa. Hey, Dante crouched to his level, which was a gesture she had noticed he had started doing automatically, without having to think about it. This adjustment of his whole large self to Nico's scale. He held out the small package. I brought you something. Nico opened it with the careful deliberation he brought to all significant things. Inside was a small compass, antique brass, the kind with a case that opened and closed. Nico looked at it for a very long time. For Verdano, Dante said. If you're going to have mountains and rivers, you need to know which way is north. Valentina watched her son hold the compass up to the light, turning it in his fingers with the expression she knew well of. The expression of someone who has received exactly the right thing. Thank you, Papa, Nico said. Dante's face did the thing that she had stopped trying to armor herself against. He stood. He looked at her over Nico's head. She looked back. Add more garlic. Her mother said from the fruit bowl. Mama, Valentina said, I'm just saying. Dinner was chaotic and imperfect, and full of flour residue and overlapping conversation and Nico's detailed explanation of how a compass worked, partly correct. Enthusiastically delivered, and her mother's opinions on everything, and Dante eating the dense pasta with the expression of someone who was genuinely fine with this, and was not performing fineness. After Nico was in bed, after Dante had sat on the edge for 20 minutes, while Nico explained the latest developments in Verdano's eastern provinces, after the compass had been placed with ceremony on the bedside table, Valentina and Dante stood in the kitchen, washing dishes in a silence that was entirely comfortable. Dante said quietly, Yes, she said. He is. You did that. We did that, she said. In the only possible sense? No, he said. You did it. The person he is art, that's you. 6 years of you. He dried a bowl. I get to know him now, but I know who raised him. I see it every time I look at him." She was quiet for a moment, her hands in the warm water. "He has your patience," she said. "Your particular way of being still when he's thinking. I used to find it unsettling." She stopped. "Familiar," he said. "Yes," she said. "Familiar." They finished the dishes. They moved to the small balcony, the city cold and bright around them, autumn committing fully now to its season. "I want to be part of this," he said. "Not for the first time, but differently than before, more settled in it, less asking than stating. All of it. The imperfect pasta and the compass and the maps, Anne." He looked at her. "You? Particularly you?" She leaned against the railing and looked out at the city, and then at him. "You are part of it," she said. "You've been part of it for 3 months. I want to be more formal about it," he said. "Formal," she said. "A commitment?" he said. On the record. A pause. "I have a ring. I'm not showing you the ring tonight. It's too soon and you would throw me off this balcony, and also I want to do it properly." "You have a ring," she said. "I've had it for 6 weeks," he said. "Marco told me I was being premature. I told him he was wrong." She looked at him. He looked back. The city spread itself around them, complicated and alive. "We have time," she said. "We have time," he agreed. "But I want you to know, not as a future thing, but as a present thing, that I am asking. I am formally on this cold balcony, with leftover pasta in the kitchen and a 5-year-old asleep inside." He stopped. "I am asking." She looked at him for a long moment. The answer was forming itself not out of calculation or strategy or the careful processing she brought to hard decisions, but out of something simpler and more fundamental, the recognition of what was true. "Not yet," she said. "Bit." She reached out and took his hand. He let her. His fingers closed around hers with a steadiness that she had been learning to trust. "Ask me again in spring." He looked at their joined hands. "Spring," he said. "One Nico can be there for it," she said. "When it can be what it actually is, not just something between us, but something for all 3 of us. When it's real in all the ways it needs to be real." He nodded. "Spring," he said again, with the tone of a man who has committed this to the list of things he intends to do with precision and care. She leaned her head, briefly. He was warm. The city was cold. The balcony held them. "Spring," she said softly. "Now go home. I have an early briefing." He kissed her temple, carefully, the same quality as everything he did now, nothing impulsive, careless. "Good night, Valentina." "Good night, Dante." He left. She stood on the balcony for a moment longer, the city doing its infinite city things around her, and she let herself feel the full, undefended weight of what her life had become. Complicated and costly and built from difficult materials and entirely, essentially and beyond argument her own. She went inside. She checked the door was locked. She had taught Nico this, and then Nico had apparently taught Dante, which meant she now had 2 people in her life who checked the door, and she went to bed. Spring arrived in the way it always does in that city. Not gradually, but with sudden decision, as though the season has been considering for weeks and has finally made up its mind. One morning the light was different and the trees were green, and Nico came home from school with dirt on his knees and a drawing of something he said was the coast of Verdano, but which Valentina privately thought looked more like a very confident abstract painting. On a Saturday in April, when the park down the street had committed fully to its warmth and the world smelled like cut grass and beginning. Dante arrived at the apartment at 11 in the morning with a box from the bakery that Nico had identified as producing the city's best pastries, which was a position he held with the passion of a food critic and the objectivity of someone who very much liked sugar. They went to the park. Nico ran ahead with the energy of a child who has been contained inside for months and has opinions about it. Valentina walked alongside Dante. The morning was easy around them. At some point, not staged, not calculated, but at the right moment, which she would later describe to her mother as simply obvious. Dante stopped walking. She stopped too. Nico was 20 feet ahead. Having located a very interesting stick, Dante reached into his pocket. He produced the ring, which was simple and precise and She looked at it for a moment exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen herself. "I said I'd ask in spring," he said. "You did," she said. "Nico," he called. Nico looked up from his stick. He looked at Dante. He looked at the ring. His eyes went wide in the particular way that preceded either a very large emotion or a very large question. Given that he was 5, it would probably be both. Dante looked at Valentina. "I need to ask Nico first," he said. "Yes," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady, which she noted and did not attempt to correct. Dante walked to Nico and crouched to his level. He said something that she couldn't hear from where she stood, and she decided not to try to hear, to let this be its own conversation, to let these two people she loved in the most essential part of herself do this thing without her managing it. Nico looked at the ring. He looked at Dante. He said something. Dante laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised out of him, the rare kind odd, and said something back. Then Nico looked over at Valentina, across 20 feet of park in April, in the good morning light, and gave her a thumbs up. She laughed. She couldn't help it. She put her hands over her face and laughed. Dante came back to her. She saw when she lowered her hands, smiling food for the first time in her experience of him all. Not the almost smile, not the edge of it, but the real one, unguarded and unmanaged and entirely his. He said yes, Dante said. He also said that when we get married he wants to be in charge of the music. Of course he did, she said. Dante held out his hand with the ring, and she looked at it, and she looked at him, and she looked past him to where Nico was already back with his stick, and conducting some serious stick-related business, and she thought about everything that had happened, and everything that it had cost, and everything that was still ahead. The difficulty, the complications, the ongoing negotiation of two strong people with different ways of being in the world. And she thought, Eve, yes. This is the thing. She gave him her hand. He put the ring on. It fit. Of course it fit. He would have made sure it fit. With the same precise attention he brought to everything, the same quality of care that had started showing up in all the small things and that she had been learning, slowly, to let herself receive. He held her hand for a moment. "Spring," he said. "Spring," she agreed. Nico appeared at her elbow. He looked at the ring. He looked at them. "Now are you going to kiss?" he asked. "Nico," she said. "What?" "That's what happens next." Dante looked at her. She looked at him. "He's not wrong," she said. "He usually isn't," Dante said. He kissed her in the park in the April morning, with their son 6 inches away making a sound that was either approval or mild embarrassment, and possibly both simultaneously. It was unhurried and certain, and tasted like the kind of thing you don't have to perform, because it is simply, entirely true. When they separated, Nico had wandered a diplomatic distance away and was looking at something in the grass. "Papa," he called, without looking up. "Come see this." Or Dante squeezed her hand once and went. She watched them crouch over whatever small wonder the grass had offered up. These two people with their matching way of holding still, their identical quality of attention, the grandfather's name on the river of an imaginary continent, and the compass pointing north. And she let herself feel it without defense, without distance, without the careful management she had lived inside for so long. She let it be what it was. Her family, standing in the spring light, in a city that had tried to pull them apart and failed, looking at something small and alive and marvelous in the grass. Word count approximately 16th, 200 words.